Oh, there is blessing in this gentle breeze, a visitant that while he fans my cheek, doth seem half conscious of the joy he brings. From the green fields and from yon azure sky, whatever his mission, the soft breeze can come to none more grateful than to me, escaped from the vast city where I long had pinned a discontented sojourner, now free as a bird to settle where I will. What dwelling shall receive me? In what vale shall be my harbor? Underneath what grove shall I take up my home? And what clear stream shall with its murmur lull me into rest? The earth is all before me, with a heart joyous nor scared at its own liberty. I look about, and should the chosen guide be nothing better than a wandering cloud, I cannot miss my way, I breathe again. That's a poetic introduction to the beauty of the German forests. Yeah, German forest, English romantic poetry. What's not to love? Yeah, so as I start recording this romantic environmentalist poetic video, we're the 7th of June 2023, and I've been taking a few days not of rest, because I'm not resting, but I am working in a more soothing, more calm, more relaxing environment, because I have spent the past 15 months reading books, watching videos, writing, taking notes, studying, doing civic duty, trying to solve very complex problems all day long, most of the day. And sometimes I have what is probably called autistic burnouts, and I just need to change my environment and to go into the forest just to walk. I cannot walk a lot because I'm partly disabled, but just the soothing, calming breeze, this gentle breeze, as Wordsworth would say, yeah, it helps me a lot, because sometimes just being in a natural environment, although strictly speaking it's not really natural, because it has been shaped by human action, but a more sparsely populated and less urbanized environment, one might say, it's really soothing. And I've been studying thoroughly Anglo-saxon Sociobiology. Here that's evolutionary biology, here that's evolutionary psychology. A delight to read, it will trigger an intellectual explosion the likes of which we haven't seen for a few decades. I find this highly comical, because Charles Murray, when he writes this, he probably, he knows that the last intellectual revolution or intellectual explosion in the social sciences was a few decades ago, and it was triggered by Charles Murray. So basically that's a way of saying that's the best book since I published The Bell Curve. A good sense of humor, Mr. Murray. Yeah. Yeah, and also I've been reading briefly Schellingian, Whiteheadian process philosophy. Yeah. I try to gather knowledge and to be able to understand the world better, of course, but also to be able to complete my worldview, to be able to communicate more clearly and to be able to make connections between the various fields of scientific endeavors. And the last time that I took a few days off in the forest, the German forest, historically, culturally, anthropologically, geographically as well. It was to study Austrian economics, and I'm still interested in Austrian economics, obviously, because economics is important, but now I've been working, studying, gathering knowledge about mostly evolutionary psychology and sociobiology. Yeah, and I will praise the Anglo-Saxons. Again, they are really great. Modern evolutionary theory, it comes predominantly from the Anglo-Saxons because there's a deep, long-lasting tradition with Darwin and then Galton, etc. And in anthropology as well, with Francis Galton, of course, but Richard Lynn, Edward Dutton. Yeah, in the realm of evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, and research on intelligence, the Anglo-Saxons, predominantly the English, but also the Americans, they are really head and shoulders above all others. Yeah. Yeah. So I will just share some thoughts. We live in an era, the internet age, where information can circulate all over the world very fast, and the totality of knowledge coming from all over the world is made accessible. And while reading this book, the author, Nicholas Wade, explains that's a scholar, a respected academic. He explains how groupthink operates within academia. Basically, in order to be published in respected journals, to increase one's reputation among one's own peers, to receive fundings from government, or to pursue research, one has to respect an orthodoxy, a correct way of thinking. It's not necessarily rigorously and explicitly defined, but there is a paradigm which has to be respected, and those who deviate from the orthodoxy, they do not receive funds, so they cannot pursue their research. They get shunned and ostracized by their peers, and that's how groupthink operates. And I understood this already a long time ago, but it's becoming clearer. A group composed of, here let us take the example of scholars, that's a microcosm. The individual assistants, researchers, professors, students, scientists, etc., they might be honest and decent persons, and most of them are, of course, but if every person just compromise a little bit on scientific integrity for the sake of maintaining career, reputation, and a job, none of them in the group are necessarily bad or ill-intentioned, but if all the members of the groups, because they want to preserve their reputation and their membership within the group, if all of them or most of them do very slight compromises, it can create massive collective delusion, and this is how this is how groupthink can lead people astray, because in the microcosm of scholars, this is how it works, but it operates within politicians, within journalists, and very tiny groups of people with a lot of influence and prestige due to their intellectual abilities can, in a way, deceive and manipulate an entire society, but unconsciously. Sometimes, of course, there are members who are well aware of what they are doing, but the majority, they just want to maintain their reputation. They want to respect the implicit codes of correctness, moral, political correctness, or moral acceptability within the group. So they just want to be decent persons to avoid controversial topics. But when a lot of people do this for a prolonged period of time, here it has been the case in the scientific departments for many decades, and it has spread, it mutually reinforces itself in the media, academia and politics, and then big business who have to apply a certain line of a certain ideology to attract customers to be in line with the political mood of the day or of the era, one might say. People who are very intelligent and very influential, who have a status, they can deceive, while deceiving themselves, an entire society, precisely because they hold to their status, their reputation within the group. And this is how the collective mass delusion in modern Western societies can operate, and indeed that's how it works. And that's why any person who is reasonably intelligent and who wants to pursue a career, if you become an independent researcher, you are in a position where you can say, because if you have no status, you can say things that all those with a status are not willing or are not morally allowed by group pressure, peer pressure, to say. So that's how it works, basically. I understood this without being able to formulate this as clearly, but that's just a psychological collective group phenomenon. In order to live collectively, humans, they have to deceive about certain aspects of human nature. Aggression, the tendency towards hostility towards certain group of person, the desire, etc. There are topics which are not socially acceptable, who cannot be formulated socially. And in a way, it's kind of healthy and morally sane that people do not speak about all their belief or all their thoughts in society. It's partly healthy to restrict oneself, but the problem is when it becomes really excessive, it is what in anthropology is called a taboo, and it can create a collective delirium in a sense, that a collective psychosis. And the historical example that is often used, it's a little bit more complicated, but in 19th century England, sex was the great taboo, but everyone was aware that sexual intercourses occurred, but it was a social taboo. And in the modern, the problems they might have be in terms of frustration for some people in terms of psychological or psychoanalytical frustration, but it was okay. But in the second half of the 20th century and in the 21st century, the great taboo in most Western societies is the question of race. Most people, they are aware that it exists and that it significantly influences, or at least partly, depending on what they believe, but they are aware that genetic differences, the troublesome inheritance, as Mr. Wade calls this, impacts social behavior, but they are not willing to talk about it, or they pretend that they are not aware, or maybe they delude themselves, or they try to be respectable. So for the overwhelming majority of people who are politically correct, here it's especially the case with the really Anglo-Saxon puritanical mentality. It comes from a good intention. Most educated white liberals, they are good-intentioned people. They really want not to harm anyone, not to hurt others' feelings, most of them. But the problem is that if everyone does this, it creates a mass psychosis. And here we are not talking about potential sexual frustration as might have been the case in 19th century England. We're talking about really problematic social interactions, denying the reality, the biological basis and the genetic basis of race differences and the impact that it has upon social behavior, not talking about this, not being willing to discuss this, and not taking this into account in social policies. This has brought about, and this still brings, a self-blinding, and it renders modern Westerners unable to confront in an intelligent, rational, peaceful way the problems with which they are confronted, and it creates, of course, problems, psychological, social, economic, etc., etc. Yeah. So yeah, and we are living in a times where through the circulation of information and the ability for any person to start independent research independently precisely of groups of scholars, academic circles, official institutions, people can start independent research, and therefore they can discover and study and share knowledge which cannot be, for moral reasons, cannot be shared by the official institutions, which creates a greater and greater divide between the official discourse and the knowledge that people become aware of by seeking alternative sources of information. And it's one thing to be aware of this, but a book like this illustrates the fact that even respected or respectable scholars are becoming aware of this. There are members of the intellectual elites who are seceding from the mainstream dogma, one might say, and because the information is made public, those who are within academia, within the media, and even within politics, they are not dumb. I mean, some of them maybe they are, but most of them are not completely dumb. They are aware that their position is being being challenged, and that their discourse is losing its appeal, its respectability in terms of the belief, the reliability that the people, as of now it's still limited, but the people, by having access to a different and alternative source of information, they are adopting more and more the official narrative, and those who are the transmitters, the agents, the carriers, the agents of the official narrative, they are becoming aware that there is a loss a loss of confidence in public discourse, one might say, politicians, journalists, and academia. Yeah, this is one of the aspects of the times that we are living in. Yeah. And yeah. Also, I intended to talk about economics briefly. I'm not very interested in economics as such. I'm much more interested in philosophy and science and poetry. But I'm nonetheless, I try to be responsible and to be complete, in a sense that precisely a worldview, a Weltanschauung, a complete, a full philosophical worldview, or any worldview, but actually if it's complete and serious, it has to be philosophical. It has to include an ethical aspect and an economic aspect. And I've noticed that, of course, a lot of people are interested in the economy, how to acquire wealth, to increase purchasing power, economic opportunities, etc. But they are not interested in economics. So they are interested in the fruits and the opportunities offered by the economy, but they are not interested in studying the theoretical aspect. This is one of the reasons why the Mises Institute, which is another example of an alternative, one might say anti-scholarly establishment, think tank or institute or group of thinkers, who are, some of them, they are within academia and they are even respected, but the Mises Institute is an alternative to the establishment in terms of economic doctrine, which enables them to develop their thoughts independently of peer pressure from the traditional official orthodoxy in the realm of economics within academia, the media, and politics, which enables them to develop views which most of the time are very enlightening and mind-shaking in a good sense. So the problem, I mean, it's not really it's partly a problem, but actually no, but one of the features of the Austrians and the Mises Institute and the libertarian economists is that they develop very sound, very intelligent, very coherent doctrines, but unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of people who should be interested in their doctrines are not, precisely because most people, ordinary people, they are not interested in economics. They are interested in the economy, but not. They are not interested in the theoretical aspect. But I don't ask people to be interested in economics, because honestly, it can be interesting, enlightening, rigorous, pleasant, satisfying, challenging, etc. if it's rigorous and serious, but it's not really fascinating as such. It can be greatly enlightening, but it's not. I mean, personally, here, that's an opinion. I'm not passionate about economics. I respect those who dedicate their life to in advancing the theoretical foundations, or the historical unfolding, or the empirical data of economics. If they find enjoyment and if they are honest, that's great for them, and they contribute to the development of science, one might say, but it's not really fascinating. But it's nonetheless important, because I've been reading. I've begun to read this book. Of course, this is really fascinating and interesting and genuinely interesting, and it's great. It's inspired. It's insightful. It's spiritual. It's elevated. It's pleasant, but a romantic or cosmic worldview. A cosmic worldview has to include all sciences, one might say, within the worldview precisely. And romanticism is great, and Matthew Siegel is partly a romantic philosopher. That's a book by a French author about German romantic philosophy. Romanticism historically, of course, it's great and it's fascinating, and I am kind of passionate. The great poets, the great painters, the great artists, the great sculptors, the philosophers, the writers, etc., the novelists. They are great, of course, but Romanticism has to be balanced by a more boring, bland, dry aspect, which, in my view, in the realm of economics, would be precisely Austrian economics, and libertarianism. It's in a way an attempt to I thought about this romantic libertarianism or libertarian romanticism, namely the passion, the drive, the soul aspect of romanticism has to be balanced by the more rigorous, logical, and sometimes a little bit boring aspect of economics. And yeah, libertarianism, if it's just economics, it's not really interesting. Making money, of course, it's important in order to have a functioning society, to have the institutions which enable the creation, the production, and the development of wealth. It's a necessity, one might say, but it's not really interesting as such. And romanticism, of course, for most Europeans who are vaguely interested in their culture, their heritage, or simply who are in touch with their deep ancestral nature, one might say, romanticism expressed variously the relationship with the cosmos, with the natural world, here understood in terms of natural landscapes, one might say, and return to their roots, to a more simple way of living, more emphasis put on human interactions, personal interactions, subjectivity, emotion, feelings, introspection, etc., etc. It's very appealing, but the problem with the romantics is that some of them, they tend to be a little bit irrational, and that's why it's important to have sound economic theories, a scientific mindset, a philosophical view. So I try to unify as much as I can with my limited faculties as an individual, to unite what can be and what has to be united. Yeah. So yeah. And yeah, that's what I could say. So the Romantics, historically, these were some of them reactionary right-wingers, anti-modern right-wingers, but there were also liberal, here I'm talking liberal in the context of the early 19th century, someone like Wordsworth, and other, here liberals mean people who were enthusiastic about the French Revolution. Yeah, a lot of romantics, precisely they were enthusiastic, but then it brought a lot of disenchantment for a lot of them. Yeah, but yeah, what was I saying? Yeah, the romantics, either these were reactionary right-wingers or liberals, and in the modern day, romanticism in a way would be a sensibility of a left-wing sensibility of the European soul, and the right-wing aspect of romanticism, basically that would be to have the ethnic component. I know that they are intelligent, they are not necessarily politicized, but if they are politicized, they are more left-leaning, one might say. In academia, a lot of academics who are interested in romanticism, they have no either they have no political biases, or they are more left-leaning. So yeah, there are left-leaning Europeans who are interested in romanticism, and there are right-wing, but they are not aware of the ethnic aspect the European, the specifically European aspect of the movement, it can be partly universalized because depending on how Romanticism is defined, all human groups can find whatever their ethnic origin and the diversity, etc. They can find particular expressions in their own context. But Romanticism has really an intellectual, poetic, literary, and although political movement and ecological here, not in the modern sense of ecology, but means interaction with the environment. In this sense, Romanticism is universal. If it means unity with one's own people and with one's own surrounding environment and attachment to roots and traditions, etc. In this sense, it can be universalized, but to be consciously developed and to become a literary, intellectual, philosophical movement and political movement, like it has been the case historically at the turn of the 18th and early 19th century, it's specifically European. And yeah. And yeah. So a lot of scholars or people who are interested consciously or unconsciously about certain aspects of Romanticism, they have no political consciousness or no ethnic consciousness. And a lot of Europeans who have an ethnic consciousness, they have no culture, one might say, and they are really limited and limiting sometimes. So yeah. So there are the dry, bland and boring, but nonetheless efficient, enlightening and interesting scientists, either in the realm of evolutionary psychology, sociobiology, anthropology, etc., or economics. There are a lot of enlightening and very interesting scientists, like the evolutionary biologist and psychologist and the Austrian economists, for instance. They are very interesting, but they are kind of a little bit dry and bland nonetheless. They are necessary, they are important, but it's not... It sometimes is fascinating, but it's not... it does not arouse passion, if I had to formulate this. And Romanticism can be fascinating while being passionate as well, and most of the time it is, but it's not always a very rational, and it can give rise to a little bit excesses. Yeah, so it has to be balanced. Yeah, there has to be harmony and balance. That's what I am consciously working on. Yeah. But ecology, libertarianism, Romanticism. I wouldn't say socialism, because I do not believe in political socialism, but with a social aspect. Yeah, I don't know how to. Yeah, social libertarianism. Libertarianism as such on its own cannot work. It has to have a social component, but if it is forcefully implemented by the government, it degenerates into political socialist authoritarianism. But I'm well aware that radical libertarianism on its own, it's not enough. You cannot have a society of here, autistic individuals. Here it's a little bit derogatory. It's not... I'm not criticizing clinically, psychologically autistic people, but the view of Robinson Crusoe, it might be an interesting perspective, but it's not sustainable socially. Yeah. So here, the leftists, when they are honest, their criticism of radical libertarianism is relevant sometimes in terms of society. The sociological criticism of libertarianism by the intelligent left is relevant, but the economic criticism of the left by the radical libertarian is most of the time very relevant as well. The ideal, of course, is to have balance and unity in a good sense. So yeah. And here I will read a few, not read, but just make a remark. I've been reading this book. There's an interesting parallel between the order of bodies of organism, the bringing forth, the emergence of order within biological bodies and organism, and the emergence of money in the Austrian theory of economics. Richard Dawkins, talks about self-assembly, how individual individual genes, bits of information, and eventually cells. How individual cells, by what a process that Dawkins calls self-assembly, by obeying local rules, they develop very complex, organized, ordered structures that become organism and bodies, the body of a human, an eagle, a dolphin, etc., etc. And without central planning, without architect, without a top-down plan, but there is a bottom-up emergence, a bottom-up procedure of self-assembly, and no top-down planned architecture. In the view of Dawkins, this is how, by obeying local rules being locally obeyed by individual cells, bring about a great order, structure, and beauty and harmony on a macro level, one might say, without central planning. And this is the view of evolutionary biology that Dawkins expresses in his book. And this is parallel to the view of the emergence of money, according to Carl Menger, one of the founder, or the historical founder of the Austrian School of Economics. The view of money by Carl Menger is that money is a social institution which emerges spontaneously out of the interactions, the willing interactions of people within society, and which develops and facilitates trades and exchange. That's the commonly accepted medium of exchange. This is money. Historically, the role and the purpose of money. There is, of course, a unit of values, unit of account, store of value, medium of exchange. But it's supposed to facilitate trade, to go beyond barter, beyond a barter economy, and to become the universally accepted medium of exchange, so that every singular producer in an economy can exchange his product against this common medium of exchange, so as to buy the goods and services that he needs without having to exchange what he specifically produces against that which he seeks. So here the example is a baker who wants to buy shoes. In a barter economy, he has to exchange bread for shoes. But if he wants a pair of shoes, but the shoemaker is not interested in bread, this is the double coincidence of wants, as they call this. The exchange cannot occur. But if there is a medium, if the baker exchanges the bread that he baked for whatever goods is used as money, let us say gold, and the shoemaker is willing to exchange shoes for gold, they can exchange indirectly. Yet the indirect medium of exchange, this is money. They can exchange. The baker sells bread in exchange for gold, and he buys shoes in exchange for the gold that he received for his bread. That's a simplified view. So that this is the role of money. It's a social institution which emerges by the interactions of people and not by centrally planned bureaucratic government. This is the view of Carl Menger, and the view of Dawkins is the same, that structure and order can emerge spontaneously, self-assembly, as Dawkins called this, and there can be order on a macro level if rules are obeyed on a local level, and this is real anarchy in the good sense, and real harmony. And the problem of socialists, political socialists, is that they want to impose top-down. They want the central planner to impose onto the whole of society their view. That this is why central banking and the monopoly of money, printing and coinage, and the legal monopoly that the state has on money, it's problematic because it is not the state who has to impose money onto society. It's an inverted view. It doesn't work because precisely in order to have a healthy society, the interactions between the citizens, they have to be the result of spontaneous emergence. The same goes with language. Language is a historical unfolding and development of naturally naturally emerging social interactions. Language is the product of the people. This is what the historical romantics knew. They put a lot of emphasis onto language, and here I know I've read briefly the biography of Wordsworth. He put an emphasis onto the use of common language and common themes in his poems. Yeah. So language, like money, or like organism in the view of Dawkins, it is that which emerges spontaneously and naturally out of the free interactions. I mean, free means voluntary. Of course, there are limitations because there are restrictions within all societies, but language used to be an outgrowth of the people. And when the state or a central agency seeks to impose and to regulate language, or to regulate and impose money from top down, it is in a way an attack, one might say, an attack against society, because it's an inversion. And the state is not supposed to control the money supply like the language, political correctness, and in the realm of language, inclusive writing. This is a top-down, planned, imposed, forcefully imposed through legal or moral means, the forceful imposition on regulation of language onto society. And the same goes with the monetary, the topic of money. The modern European Union has been made possible with all the economic destructionism that it has brought, and the problems that it has wreaked onto most European countries, especially Southern European countries. It is because it has been an attempt to unify the countries of Europe from top down. It was not a spontaneous will of the people to have this unity in this technocratic, proto-socialist, while being sometimes liberal, but with collectively enforced measures and the control of money. It was not the spontaneous will of the people to erase their nations, to mold and to melt into this technocratic entity that has become the European Union, it was imposed top-down by manipulation, deception, and activism and lobbying from powerful groups. Yeah, and the money has been used as a tool because it's not if, but money is a social institution, and therefore those who control the money supply, they can reshape society because by shaping the interest rates and deciding what is legal to use as a currency, they can shape economic policies. They can shape and mold and influence the political game. They can decide the investment policies. They can have a tremendous impact upon the financing of businesses, which is facilitated or made more difficult by changing the fractional reserve rate and the interest rate, etc., etc. So those who control the money supply, they hold a tremendous power onto the whole of society, and it is top-down. This is why it's a tool of domination. This is what Ron Paul and the Austrian understand very well. Yeah. Yeah. So there is a conflict, one might say, between the bottom-up emergence of institutions in the broadest sense. It can be language, money, culture, etc., and the top-down imposition, forceful, coercive implementation by the elites here in terms of dominance, either economically or intellectually or in terms of status, whatever. Yeah, and that's the reason why a lot of leftists, they blame a lot of problems on capitalism. I understand partly why they think so, but actually what they don't see is that what the leftists, the economic leftists call capitalism, actually it's really crony-capitalism. Namely, this is the state which forcefully imposes restrictions, coercion onto the whole of society. Capitalism, it can mean, for the left, it means a big business and finance. It's ill-defined, or the effects of modernity in terms of culture and consumption. But from a libertarian perspective, capitalism means just private property. It means free interaction as opposed to coerced interaction. It is the state which legally forces people to interact, to adopt certain behavior, to prevent certain actions, to impose economic, cultural, political decisions. Yeah, and here, yeah, the Americans, they are clear-minded because for most of them, capitalism means private property, the right to property. Yeah. And then the left, they tend to blame what they sometimes acknowledge as being, they do not speak about cultural decadence because it sounds maybe too right-wing, but cultural problem, but precisely they call top-down culture, they call this capitalist consumerism. Which actually most of the time is, at least in some countries, it's financed by the state or by big corporations and lobbies, but yeah. But precisely a real culture, one might say, emerges from the people. And here in a country, in the countries of Western Europe, especially a country like France, they tend to blame a lot of problems on what they call Americanism or the Americanization of culture. But they don't see that it is the state which controls the culture apparatus by controlling, having a ministry for culture, subsidizing cultural products, controlling the educational system, academia, censoring, prohibiting certain views, etc. So yeah, they are kind of blinded, but yeah. But one might say that the view of the Romantics, which coincide with the view of Dawkins in evolutionary biology and the view of the Austrians in economics, is that, what is healthy is that which is the process of self-assembly, in the vocabulary of Dawkins, or spontaneous emergence, a spontaneous order, or the ancestral roots and the folk ways of the people. This is what the Romantic poets and thinkers cherished so much in the early 19th century, the historical tradition of the people. Yeah. And I will not talk more than an hour, but I wanted to make a poetic remark. Just a brief remark about work. When I record these kind of videos, it doesn't look like work because I'm just talking, not partly randomly, but actually it is work, or at least it's the result of work, because the rest of the day, either I read and study and take notes and gather information and work to gather knowledge and or to share knowledge more clearly. So I say, in a way, it doesn't look like work because it's not pre-planned and structured, etc. But when I say what I say in my random videos like these, this is the thoughts which are the result of months, years, or decades of study or maturing process. So I tend to say most of the time more and more intelligent things. Yeah. So that I just wanted to clarify this, and also that's another aspect. I haven't been practicing civic virtue for the past couple of days, precisely because I have moved in the mountains, and here the streets are clean. There are no or very few cigarette butts to clean, and I have no books to distribute in local commerce because there are none here. But practicing virtue, one might say civic virtue, is also a means to give more creed or credentials to what I say. When I encourage people to change their diet, to participate in local charities, to offer good books, to buy supplies, to encourage others to be more responsible, etc. I have been practicing this. So it's not just empty talk. I try to practice most of what I preach. And and I study thoroughly all day. I watch videos. It can be entertaining in the sense that I find satisfaction when I watch good videos. I've been watching a conference by Ron Paul just yesterday, and it's great as always. So it's entertaining in a sense that it's pleasing and satisfying to listen to intelligent people. But I use this as a means of producing more intelligent content. And when I produce these kind of videos where I just speak randomly, this is just a process, a moment in my process of development. Most of the rest of the time that I dedicate to not studying or not doing what I call civic virtue, I work on structuring my worldview. So I am in a process of working, and I am working on improving my worldview. So what I show in this video is just ordinary talk in a way. And so also I was reading in the book by both Nicholas Wade and also David Booth, the book on evolutionary psychology, the relationship between the genes and the environment, the genetic determinism and cultural influence, the blank slate theory, versus heredity. These are opposition in the social sciences and in anthropology. The leftists, they tend to believe in the blank slate or the primacy of the environment and of culture, whereas right-wingers, they tend to believe in the importance and the primacy of heredity, genes, and biology. Yeah. But it's partly dialectical in the sense that a moderate view is neither one nor the other, but it's simply to acknowledge that historically, that's the story of evolution by natural selection, that the genes of any organism are the product to adaptations to the environment. And for humans especially, the environment is an exteriorization of genetic predisposition, namely certain genes predispose individuals or group of individuals to behave in certain way and to bring about certain type of social institutions. This is what Nicholas Wade talks about. And so the genes, they produce, the environment produces a certain type of genes. The genes, they interact with the environment and produce through culture and learned behavior and institutions precisely other types of behavior in the broadest sense of social behavior, which retro-causally, here that's Wechselwirkung, which influence retro-causally the mating and reproductive pattern. Institutions have an impact, in the broadest sense, institutions have an impact on mating and reproductive strategies. So culture shapes genetics and genes shape culture. That's Wechselwirkung. They mutually, reciprocally influence one another. That's really the speculative view, one might say, which is kind of true, that neither one, just the cultural factor, nor the other, just the genetic factor, are true. It cannot be quantified which one is more true or which one is more important. Both are important, but historically and even to this day, that's the thesis of Nicholas Wade, that evolution is still in the process of unfolding in a way, and they mutually and reciprocally determine one another. That's a good unity of opposites. But the problem in the modern world is that the blank slate theory, the environmentalist, not in terms of ecological environment, but the idea that it is social environment that shapes overwhelmingly or almost totally the behavior, that's the view which is currently held by the overwhelming majority of scholars in the Western world. It's way too excessive, namely there is too much environmentalism and cultural determinism in a way. There is too large a belief, which is sometimes a deception, sometimes a delusion. The belief in the power of culture and the power of politics to shape behavior is way too excessive. That's why there is a return to realistic anthropology, genetic anthropology, but the other excess, of course, would be to believe that everything is genetic. It's not the case. Culture plays an important role, but the basis, it has to be restated, and this is what happens in the movement of ideas in the modern world with scientists like Nicholas Wade, but Edward Dutton, Richard Lynn, Charles Murray in his popularization work, or Heiner Rinderman in sociology, to re-establish the importance of genetic factors. Otherwise, reality is unintelligible historically and in modernity as well. So yeah. So yeah, and I will conclude by talking about forests. An image to illustrate a cosmic view, one might say. On a physical level, quantum theory, I simplify to the utmost, but basically, quantum physics say that there is a universal field, a quantum field, out of which particles of matter, quarks, leptons, bosons, whatever they are called, which form the protons and neutrons of atoms, and the electrons also. The particles, particle physics, so the basic building blocks of the material world, the elementary particles, which are changing because they discover new particles, or they subdivide that which was previously thought to be an elementary particle. Actually, it can be subdivided, but yeah, the particles which constitute the atoms, so the protons, the neutrons, and the electrons, and the atoms constitute the material world. So the particles, they emerge out of the quantum field, and the individual particles which make up the atoms which constitute the building blocks of the material world, so the individual particles, that's a way of poetic, I don't know, but that's a way of a metaphorical way, one might say. Individual physical particle, they are to the quantum field what the individual trees in a forest are to the forest. On a quantum level, there is one universal field out of which all particles emerge. And from a botanic standpoint, as far as I know, at least in some forest, one might say, there is actually only one forest, and on the underground level, all the trees and the plants, they are interconnected through the roots. So what appears as a multiplicity of individual trees in a forest, actually, on a root level, there is only one individual. And each singular tree is a manifestation of the underlying interconnected web of roots, which are invisible, or sometimes they are, because the roots, they come out of the ground sometimes, but the underlying web, interconnected web of roots is invisible, but we see the individual trees. And here that's just an analogy, but in quantum physics, the quantum field is omnipresent, and the individual particles which constitute the building blocks of the material world, they are individuals emerging out of the quantum field. That's the analogy, yeah. So there is only one quantum field, like there's only one forest, and all the individual trees are just singular manifestations. That's a cosmic view. That's the unity of unity and multiplicity, yeah. And from a spiritual standpoint, here that's kind of a little bit poetic, but what happens in the modern world is that Europeans, which means anthropological Europeans, they are in a search for their roots because they have been uprooted. A lot of peoples on this planet have been uprooted over the centuries through religion, the imposition of religions like Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, etc., and then through imperialism in the most remote areas, and then colonialism, modernization, westernization, and then the ideologies like socialism, communism, etc., etc. They have brought a uniformization process which has made it so that a lot of people have lost their roots, a lot of peoples have lost their roots. But what happens with anthropological Europeans in the modern world is that they are searching for their roots, because European populated societies are in a process of decline and decadence and vanishing in the long term. So Europeans are the most eager to, and also partly because they have the economic possibility, but Europeans, among the younger generation, they are the most eager to seek their roots, spiritual, cultural roots. And here the image is like the tree who would go reconnect with their roots. They would see the underground, underlying web, a network which connects all the other trees. And that's why Europeans in the modern world, through the advent of the internet, those who embark upon a quest to reclaim their roots, they have spiritual experiences. Those who incorporate in their journey the scientific, cultural, psychological aspects and spiritual aspects, and this particular, let us imagine a particular group of trees who would dig in their roots. They would see, not literally, but that's the way of talking, but they would understand the interconnectedness of all the trees of the forest. This is why Europeans are emerging progressively, and they are having spiritual experiences while unfolding, incorporating, developing, conceptualizing, integrating the modern developments of science. Yeah, this is what has happened to me as a singular individual, but I know that this is what happens to other individuals as well. Yeah, yeah, that's why Europeans are returning to their roots, literally spiritual roots, and it is the European tradition which enables to more fully and rigorously, in a good sense, grasp the cosmic unity, in a way. The cosmos, there's only one cosmos, it's the same for all. And there have been traditions in India, most notably Indian philosophy, who have had a feeling or a view of the unity, the interconnectedness of all phenomena and events, and a cosmic unity. But Europeans have historically more thoroughly thought about this philosophically, intellectually, scientifically, and yeah. So books like these, that's a thoroughly romantic European perspective, even though that's not explicit, it's not necessarily even conscious, but Schelling and Whitehead, these are very European in the most noble sense thinkers. And yeah, and here in the case of the particular case of Europeans, the romantic philosophy in the broadest sense, it's really a unifying factor, because I've been reading a little bit of Wordsworth. Of course, I appreciate his poetry a great deal, but there is really a common thread among the German, French, English, and American poets, writers, authors, thinkers of the 19th century, but actually it has been reoccurring and recurring throughout the history of Europeans. But here, my personal culture is limited, of course, but it's broad enough and wide enough to know that the German romantics of the 19th century, the French romantics, and the English romantics, and the American transcendentalists, here I will give a few names. The German romantics, I would say novalists, there are others, but novalists. France, there are many, but I would say Lamartine as the most prominent, Alphonse de Lamartine. The English, there are many as well, but I would say Wordsworth as the most prominent. And in America, the transcendentalist movement, it's not Romanticism as such, but it shares a lot of common features with the Romantics. There's Emerson and Thoreau, the most prominent figures. There are many others, but in all other countries. But it's really a universal movement within the European context, because it has impacted, it has evoked, it has awakened, one might say, something profound and deep about the core of the European worldview, one might say. And here I really give my own perspective. I have read Wordsworth, Novalis, and Lamartine, and many others, but I just named these three. So French, German, and English Romantic poetry, and I can see and feel the underlying unity in the native language. I've read Lamartine in French, Novalis, partly in German, not a lot, partly in French, but a little bit in German, Schelling as well, of course. But Novalis, which is the most shining example of German Romanticism, one might say, Lamartine, the most classical example, and Wordsworth, and in different languages, in their native language, and there is a unity underlying the multiplicity, and that's a beautiful unity. And yeah, that's what I had to share. Yeah, so I will stop the video here. Just being in the forest, although I am sitting on the floor, it's not very comfortable, but being in the forest, it does me a whole lot of good. Yeah, so now I will go back working and walking in the forest. Walking at all, but walking in the forest is a pleasure, and I appreciate this every time, because I'm not capable of walking a lot because of limitations, but just being in the forest, it's a joy, one might say. Yeah. I breathe again.